One afternoon, Mavis was bringing a load of stone down from the quarry. But as she entered the village streets, Mavis came upon the roadblock. Caroline, the vintage car, stood awkwardly across the rails. "Get out of my way!" Mavis huffed, drawing to a stop. "Oh, I am sorry, dearie," moaned Caroline. "My old engine agrees with hot days like these." "Well, kindly overheat somewhere out of my way," snapped Mavis. Caroline gave a sad sigh as her owner and the nearby loco pushed her clear of the rails. The poor car looked depressed. Mavis regretted her harsh tone. "I'm sorry. It's just Percy wouldn't let me hear the end of it if I was late," she apologized. "I'm sure you'll feel better soon," she added hastily. But Caroline just sighed. "I'm just not as young as I once was." Mavis felt sorry for her as she scampered away. At the yard, she met Toby, to whom she explained the entire ordeal. "The poor thing looks distraught," Mavis sighed. "If only her owner would sort her engine out." "I've noticed a change in her myself," confessed Toby. "Her engine could be tuned up quite easily, no doubt. But I fancy her owner isn't aware of that." "What a pity!" cried Mavis. "Oh, I do wish I could cheer her up somehow. It's the least I can do for being so rotten." "It would be a great kindness," agreed Toby, "but I'm not sure what could be done." Mavis racked her mind for an answer. "I'm sure I'll think of something," she said, but she couldn't. For several days, nothing came to mind. Until at last one day, several weeks later. "Perhaps that could work," Mavis mused. "It's at least worth a try." Late one afternoon, a few days later, Mavis was bringing another loaded train down. At the village, she saw Caroline, who looked as depressed as before. Mavis started through the village as usual, until suddenly, "Oh dear," she wailed. "Oh, I don't feel well at all." She drew to a halt, calling aloud. "Oh, I've blown a fuse! Fiddlesticks! Fudge even!" "You seem fine to me," muttered her driver. "Oh dear," called Caroline from nearby. "You poor thing!" "Caroline!" cried Mavis, acting as surprised as she could. "I hadn't seen you there." "Oh, perhaps you could help me?" Caroline was confused. "Me? Help you? I'm afraid I don't see how—" "Toby needs to come up and collect the workman," explained Mavis quickly. "But I'm in the way. If you send a word back, he can come and move me. You'd send a word much faster than my driver or guard." The plan was far from ideal. Mavis was aware of its many faults. However, Caroline seemed quite convinced. "Don't you worry, dearie," she called. "I may not be worth much, but I can certainly aid a friend." So off Caroline hurried, all the way to the nearby station, where Toby had just arrived. Caroline, after catching her breath, quickly explained the crisis. Once she had finished, Toby set off to collect Mavis. He brought her back to the stone-cutting yard. Mavis was feeling very pleased with herself. Her plan had worked. But her face suddenly fell when she saw a familiar figure nearby. "What's all this, then?" asked Sir Topham-Hatt sternly. Mavis was very flustered. "Oh, I was on my way to a meeting with your owner," explained Sir Topham-Hatt. "I hadn't expected to tell him about his own engine feigning an illness." "Oh, but—" "However," Sir Topham-Hatt continued, "Toby here tells me you've been very concerned about old Caroline. Taking that into account, and being sure that this sort of event will not repeat itself, I can perhaps overlook at it just this once." "Oh, yes, sir, of course, sir," blurted Mavis. Her face was as bright as scarlet. Sir Topham had turned and walked away. Toby chuckled quietly. "It was an interesting method, but I fancy you've cheered someone up." Toby was right. Caroline felt rejuvenated. "I feel like a young car again," she told Mavis when they next met. "Master gave my engine a proper overhaul for being so useful. Thank you ever so," she added quietly. "Where are you?" Caroline winked. "You can't fool me that easily, youngster." Mavis grinned bashfully. "Our little secret," she smiled as the two giggled happily.
One evening, Henry returned to the sheds in a foul temper. "What a nerve that Diesel has!" The other engines were perplexed. "What Diesel?" asked Duck. "That stupid old bowler," hissed Henry. "I met it at the end of the line." The other engines groaned. They could well remember old bowler from when it had come to their yard before. The impression it made was far from flattering, and feelings remained bitter. "It had the nerve to blame us for its demotion to goods work," snorted Henry. "It's not our fault it's a good-for-nothing diesel," huffed Gordon. The engines were all furious at the news, and they quickly began to talk about the troublesome diesels of the other railway. Duck felt sorry for poor Boko. "They don't mean you, of course," he comforted. "Don't worry, I understand," smiled Boko. "I know what the diesels over there are like. I'd do the same in your position. I only wish I could do something to help," he finished quietly. For the next few days, relations with the other railway were no better. Henry had further run-ins with old Bowler, each seeming worse than the last. But one day there was trouble. A set of faulty points had trapped Henry, leaving his goods without an engine. Boko was called in at the last minute. He was glad to help, though Henry remained dour. "Mind how you go," murmured Henry. "You'll probably get an earful for being acquaintances with such out-of-date claptrap as us proper engines," he sulked. "Ho ho, don't worry," called Boko as he started away. "I won't take any bother." The journey to the end of the line went without fault, and Boko rumbled over the bridge onto the mainland early. But when he arrived at the station, he found a commotion. Old Bowler stood sulking at the head of the return train, smoke billowing from its engine. The station master was furious. "Thank goodness you're here," she said to Boko. "Please, before you take your goods back, get this sorry excuse of an engine out of my sight. It's overheated." Boko glanced over at the sulking diesel. Then an idea struck him. He whispered it quietly to the station master, who shrugged in agreement. Boko quickly rolled away and was coupled to the failed engine. But to the diesel's surprise, Boko moved both it and the train into a siding. "I just need to refuel, then we can get going," explained Boko. "What are you doing?" hissed the diesel. "You're supposed to take me off. I'm not going to that backwater island." "I'm doing exactly what I was asked," replied Boko plainly. "I'm taking my train and getting you out of sight. There's no reason why you can't be brought back tomorrow. Besides, I'm sure my friends will be glad to welcome you back after so long," he added dryly. The diesel faltered and quickly tried to recover. You can't!" "Station master's already agreed." Old Bowler went pale as Boko ambled away to refuel. He returned shortly, but by then the diesel was looking very sorry for itself. "Oh, please, take me off," it begged. "I promise to be good." Boko rolled his eyes, but before he could reply, the diesel pressed on. "I mean it. I'll never be rude to your friends again. I'll even apologize should I see them again. Just don't take me there." It whimpered in such a pitiable way, Boko almost thought it a helpless animal. "Oh, very well then," he sighed. "But mind you keep your word." The diesel blurted its reassurances, and Boko shunted it away. It was still muttering quietly long after the train had left. Boko, of course, had only been pretending. "I only hope that diesel sticks by what it says," he murmured to himself. He arrived home safely, and for the next few days kept an ear out. But there was no word about old Bowler, good or bad. Until one evening, Henry returned home. "I met that old Bowler again today," he puffed. "And you know what? It apologized to me." "Surely not," gasped Duck. "Impossible," added Gordon. "It's true," replied Henry. "It offered the same to all of you, too. I wonder what could have happened. It seems quite the changed engine." The engines were surprised, and they quickly fell into a buzz of discussion speculating what may have happened. They were so busy, no one noticed Boko smiling triumphantly at the back of the shed. Harvey the crane engine had been called to Wellsworth. A set of points had jammed in the yards while Edward was shunting, and a truck and his tender had derailed. While the men went about fixing the points, Harvey set to work on hoisting the derailed truck. "Thank you," smiled Edward. "I did say to the station master that there was something wrong with these points." Not to worry. I'll have you sorted in a moment." "James has done it again. He's stuck on the hill. Edward, I need you to..." It was then the porter noticed the situation. "Crumbs," he sighed. "How is James going to get over the hill now?" "Well, what about Harvey?" said a workman. Harvey's eyes darted around. Me? Push the express?" "Oh, go on, Harvey. I'm sure you can do it," winked Edward. The crane engine wasn't so sure, but he knew how important the express was. "I'll try my best," he said timidly. "Good boy. I'll be waiting here for you when you get back," chuckled Edward. But Harvey wasn't so sure if he was coming back. He puffed to the bottom of the hill where he found James's guard and coaches waiting. "Are you ready back now, Edward?" puffed James. "No Edward today, just me," Harvey answered hastily and quickly explained. "Are you sure you can do it? I don't want to stick again," James mumbled. Harvey didn't answer. He just buffered up gently to the coaches. Soon the guard blew the whistle. James began to haul the coaches while Harvey heaved from behind. The two engines began their ascent. Push harder, snorted James in front. I'm trying, gasped Harvey, his cheeks going as bright as James's paint. More steam, whistled James. Both his and Harvey's driver obliged, and soon James's front wheels were approaching the top. Harvey used all the puff he had, and sure enough, James and his coaches crested to the top. Cheers, Harvey, peeped James, and soon his train was out of sight. Poor Harvey had no strength to answer. As soon as he caught his breath, he rolled gently back down the hill. "Well, how was it?" asked Edward. "If it's all the same to you," wheezed Harvey, "I think I'll stick to lifting trucks rather than pushing coaches." Edward chuckled and watched as the crane engine began to lift his tender. While Edward was inspected, Harvey lugged himself over to the water tower and had his well-deserved drink.
One evening, Daisy ambled into the top station. She saw Toby and Terence nearby, enraptured in conversation. "Such a delightful specimen," cheered Terence. Daisy felt flattered. "Why, thank you, my dear." Toby couldn't stifle a laugh. "We weren't talking about you." "No, something better," added Terence, the disdainful look on Daisy's face not deterring his gay chatter. "We are talking about whiskey." "Farmer Wade's new horse," explained Toby. Daisy groaned. "A horse? All this about a horse? What rubbish!" Toby and Terence didn't think whiskey was rubbish, nor did the village people. Next day, Daisy felt her passengers would talk of nothing else. "Fancy getting excited by a daft animal," grunted Daisy. "It's a fine noble creature," replied her driver. "Not feeling jealous, are we?" murmured Toby at the station by the river. That, of course, made Daisy's temper even fouler. She flounced away with a dramatic fury, but as she made her way down the line, a surprise stood waiting for her. She had barely left the tunnel when she came face to face with Whiskey. "Oh!" she hissed. "Stop!" Luckily, she stopped clear of the stray steed. Daisy had made such a noisy stop that Whiskey had turned and bolted. "Stupid thing must have escaped from its field," grumbled the driver. "I told you it was daft," snapped Daisy. "This mission list of Farmer Wade," sighed the driver, "must have broken a fence." They set off again, Daisy now feeling justified in her disdain for Whiskey. "I said it wasn't worth the fuss," she busted that night. "Fancy making me late. Animals are simply no good to anyone." She had been rambling all night. Thomas and Percy had retired in irritated huffs, but Toby was kept up by Daisy's gloats. "There is nothing wrong with animals," he replied at last. "Besides, I'd hardly expected an engine as capable as you to be severely delayed by such a simple thing." Daisy wisely decided to go to sleep after that. But next morning, once Toby had departed for the junction, she was back on form. "Forget silly horses," she cooed to the passengers. "You should admire a proper sight, like me." The passengers boarded swiftly, and Daisy glided away. The run down the branch went well at first. "Silly thing, no good at all," thought Daisy as she popped out of the tunnel. But as she neared the cutting, she was shocked. Whiskey had wandered free once again, but this new adventure was even more of a disaster. His head was stuck in the fence beside the line. Whiskey was in a dreadful state. "Oh, the poor thing! We must do something to help," cried Daisy, whose demeanor had instantly changed. "We can't leave it here all alone." Daisy made such a fuss, her driver stopped her. A brief inquiry amongst the passengers yielded it a vet. Although inexperienced with horses, they led an effort of several passengers, and Daisy's driver to calm poor Whiskey and set him free. The guard had run back to the cinnabox to warn of the delay and to send for Farmer Wade, who was quickly on the scene. "Why, bless you all," he sighed. "I hadn't time to mend my fence yesterday. Old Whiskey seems to like the wide world. Perhaps this may teach him to stay home." "Think nothing of it," said all the passengers involved. "It's Daisy you should think. She insisted that something must be done." "What an extraordinary engine," cheered Farmer Wade kindly. Daisy blushed brightly. At last, she set off again. The passengers hadn't minded their adventure, despite its delay. When she reached the next station, Daisy found Toby and Terence gossiping. "What delayed you this time?" mused Toby. "A sheep?" The excited wave of passengers quickly filled the two in, both of whom were fully entertained. "Well, well, well," chortled Terence. "Would you ever?" "Look who's like horses after all," chirped Toby. "Oh, pooh!" scoffed Daisy. "This just proves my point. They get in the way and delayed an engine. No good at all. These daft creatures." She flounced away without another word. To this day, Daisy insists her opinions on animals, especially horses, haven't changed. But Toby and Terence think she's only pretending. Don't you?
Sir Handel and Peter Sam ran the line well after Scarlowy went away. Sir Handel's trouble with the coaches had improved, and both they and the passengers had slowly begun to warm up to him. "We've got a special surprise for you two," announced Mr. Hugh one morning. "As you've been working well, you may have it first, Sir Handel." The little engines were excited. "What could it be?" whispered Peter Sam. They both soon found out. Sir Handel went into the shop and came out again fitted with buffers. He was very proud. "Look at me now," he puffed grandly, "just like a proper engine." "You look very smart," complimented Peter Sam. Sir Handel certainly felt it. I'm sorry to say that he swiftly became puffed up in the smoke box, and his boastful attitude came crawling back. "I'm a fine engine now," he would boast. "No doubt people will come just to see me." Peter Sam chuckled. Sir Handel's swankiness didn't bother him. The same, however, couldn't be said for Agnes, Ruth, Lucy, Jemima, and Beatrice, who quickly tired of Sir Handel's new favourite conversation piece. But there was still worse to come. As he was so cocky and full of self-importance, Sir Handel began to ride rougher. Agnes, who was often situated right behind him, grew crosser and crosser. "What a nuisance!" she would snap. "They should take those silly things off him." "He'll settle down soon," murmured Ruth. "Peter Sam says he's always one for little fads," added Lucy. But Agnes remained sour. "Something must be done. That engine needs his wheels trimming before he shakes me to bits." Sir Handel, of course, was too conceited to take any notice of the coaches. So it was natural that one afternoon he failed to hear Agnes chuckle darkly to herself. "Yes, that ought to do the trick," she smirked. Next morning, Sir Handel collected the coaches and took them to the platform. A crowd of people stood admiring Sir Handel. "It's good they know an elegant engine when they see one," Agnes purred from behind. Sir Handel was surprised. "Elegant engine, you say?" "Of course," cooed Agnes. "Why, it's as if you're the railway's flagship." Sir Handel liked the sound of that. As the guard's whistle blew, he steamed grandly away. Agnes sang his praises all the while, much to the confusion of the other coaches. The run up the line was very bumpy. At the top station, as Sir Handel ran around the train, the coaches spoke up. "What are you doing?" quizzed Ruth. "I thought you wanted him settled," hissed Lucy. "Worse than ever, that engine," flounced Jemima. Agnes simply chuckled. "The more puffed up he is, the more likely he is to become his own undoing." The coaches were concerned. "I don't think that's very wise," began Ruth, but Agnes wouldn't hear of it. She had made up her mind and was sticking to it. Sir Handel's journey down was void of praise. Beatrice, who was nearest him, refused to play Agnes's game. But by then it was too late. Sir Handel was already cockier than ever. As they came rocking into the final station, Sir Handel was quite the sight. Bouncing about and whistling, he was very pleased. He drew to a stop, letting off a great whoosh of steam. Whoosh! Which sprayed water all over the thing controller. Sir Handel was aghast. He went very pale. "You silly great engine!" snapped the controller. "I'd have thought you would know better than to lark about in such a conceited way." Sir Handel fluttered, trembling. "Oh, sir, I'm ever so sorry." He was in such a pitiable state, even cold Agnes felt sorry for him. "Please, sir," she said slowly, "it's partly my fault." And she quickly explained about her little ruse. "It's clear that you two should be kept apart for a while," said the thing controller sternly when Agnes had finished. Both engine and coach quietly agreed. Following the incident, Sir Handel was put on goods work. For once he was glad of the company of trucks. "Keep those old cattle trucks," he growled at Peter Sam. "No good to anyone." Agnes, meanwhile, was given her own punishment. Third-class passengers were allowed to travel in her for a fortnight. She hated it, but I think it will teach her to behave. Don't you?